The world has been watching Meghan Markle for years. From the moment she stepped onto the global stage, marrying Prince Harry, she became more than just a public figure. She became a lightning rod. Praise and adoration on one hand, and suspicion, criticism, and scrutiny on the other. But what happens when the controversies aren't just about her public statements or royal protocol? What if they reach into her private life, the most intimate sphere imaginable? The home she shares with her children? Today, we dive into an investigation that has been simmering quietly, bubbling under headlines, and occasionally erupting in whispers. Claims surrounding Meghan Markle's parenting, allegations raised by former staff, and media narratives that have painted her in conflicting lights. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. In the first seconds, let me pose a question that has haunted many observers. Can the person we see on the global stage, polished, media-savvy, fiercely protective of her image, also be someone whose private behavior raises serious questions? Some insiders, critics, and authors have claimed so. Tom Bower, the investigative journalist and royal biographer, has long maintained that there are gaps in the official narrative surrounding Meghan and Harry's life post-royal exit. Critics have pounced on these gaps, interpreting them as signs of neglect, abandonment, or mismanagement in the most sensitive parts of life, parenting. It is a topic as sensational as it is delicate. We are not talking here about casual gossip or unverified social media chatter. We are talking about claims, raised in investigative books, media reports, and by individuals who were once in close proximity to the family. These allegations touch on a sphere that no one should approach lightly. Children, their well-being, and the home environment. Let's start at the beginning. Meghan Markle's trajectory from Hollywood actress to British royal was meteoric. In the US, she was celebrated as a star with a strong personal brand and humanitarian leanings. She was articulate, poised, and seemingly independent. Yet, as soon as she became a member of the royal family, her life changed in ways the public could only speculate about. From the outside, the image was almost fairy tale. A mixed-race American actress marrying into centuries of royal tradition. But behind the scenes, sources claim, the transition was turbulent. Adjusting to royal life is notoriously difficult. There are strict protocols, relentless media scrutiny, and the weight of centuries of expectation. How does a modern woman, an outsider by every measure, navigate that? According to some accounts, not easily. Critics argue that Meghan's struggle with this new life was compounded by personal choices that have since drawn intense attention. Books and exposés, including Bower's investigations, paint a portrait of tension, conflicts with staff, a fraught relationship with palace aides, and a disconnect from the traditional expectations of royal parenting. These stories have been interpreted in multiple ways. Admirers say she was a modern parent, trying to protect her children from the intense glare of the press. Critics, however, have read the same behaviors differently, raising questions about responsibility, attention, and the line between protection and isolation. One name that keeps surfacing in these discussions is that of a former nanny. While the specifics are often cloaked in rumor, investigative sources hint at significant dissatisfaction from the staff who were directly responsible for caring for the children. The claims, often framed as allegations rather than confirmed fact, suggest that there were serious concerns about routines, supervision, and general childcare practices. Some commentators have gone as far as to link these claims to broader arguments about Meghan's parenting style. The public reaction has been polarizing. On one hand, there are those who dismiss these reports outright, viewing them as motivated by prejudice, jealousy, or a desire to tarnish her reputation. On the other, there are those who see patterns emerging, a collection of testimonies, media reports, and investigative books that, when stitched together, suggest a story that is more complicated than the polished public image would have us believe. What makes these discussions even more compelling and controversial is the timing. Many of these allegations, whispers, and investigative claims have surfaced in the aftermath of Harry and Meghan's exit from royal duties. The couple's move to the United States, their interviews with high-profile media figures, and their growing influence in public discourse have added layers of intrigue. Suddenly, private life and public persona collide. Every action, every choice, every alleged incident is magnified. The media lens is relentless, and in some ways, the narrative becomes self-reinforcing. The questions themselves, about parenting, attention, and responsibility, become part of the story, shaping public perception even in the absence of formal investigations. Now, let's be clear. No allegation should be accepted at face value. We are not here to convict anyone. We are here to examine claims, explore contradictions, and consider the testimony of those who have been close to the family. That is the heart of investigative reporting. And in doing so, the story becomes more than just about Meghan Markle. It becomes a lens through which we can explore broader themes: the scrutiny faced by women in power, the challenges of modern parenting under the public eye, and the fine line between protecting privacy and facing accountability. In the following sections, we will explore the specific claims that have surfaced in books, media reports, and interviews. We will look at the timeline of alleged incidents, the people involved, and the ways in which the narrative has evolved over time. You will see patterns, contradictions, and emotional spikes that are hard to ignore. You will meet the figures who have raised concerns, and you will encounter the responses, or lack thereof, from Meghan, Harry, and their representatives. Each piece of the puzzle adds to a larger picture, one that is complicated, controversial, and far from resolved. And here's where the first mini cliffhanger comes into play. What if everything you thought you knew about this story, the public image, the royal fairy tale, the media narratives, is just a fraction of the truth? What if the private story, told through whispered claims, investigative reports, and the recollections of insiders, paints a portrait that is far more complex and far more explosive than anyone anticipated? The next chapter will dive directly into the first set of claims, exploring the timeline, the alleged incidents, and the sources that brought them to light. We will examine the context, the contradictions, and the questions that remain unanswered. And as we move forward, keep one thought in mind. In stories like this, the truth is often buried beneath layers of public relations, media spin, and conflicting testimony. Finding it requires careful attention, a willingness to consider multiple perspectives, and the courage to face uncomfortable questions. But before we move on, ask yourself this: how do we separate perception from reality when the story involves public figures, private lives, and allegations that strike at the heart of human trust? The answer is not simple, and the journey to uncover it will take us deep into the world of investigative reporting, rumor analysis, and emotional storytelling. From the outside, Meghan Markle's home life seems impeccable: a modern palace, children laughing in safe gardens, a family united. But as many investigative authors and commentators have pointed out, the truth behind the gilded facade can be very different. Rumors began circulating shortly after Meghan and Harry settled in California that something was off in the private sphere. Staff turnover, quiet disputes, and unexplained absences of key caregivers caught the attention of those watching closely. At the center of these whispers was the figure of a nanny, a person who, in any family, serves as a direct lens into the daily reality of parenting. The alleged concerns raised by this nanny, as reported in investigative texts and media interviews, are dramatic, though they have rarely been confirmed outright. Some insiders claim that the nanny grew increasingly alarmed about routines and supervision, raising questions about whether Meghan was always present or fully engaged in the children's care. Critics interpreted these concerns as evidence of neglect, though supporters emphasized the word alleged. Nothing had yet been confirmed by authorities. Why is the nanny's perspective so compelling? Because those who work intimately with children see patterns invisible to the outside world. A child's daily environment, their sleep schedules, meals, and interactions. These are small details, but they accumulate into a picture that reveals parenting style and household dynamics. According to some reports, the nanny noticed inconsistencies, moments of joy and attention followed by long stretches of absence, sudden mood swings in the children, and routines that seemed disrupted by the unpredictability of the parents' public commitments. Critics argue that these observations are alarming. Defenders say they are taken out of context, exaggerated, or misinterpreted. Direct testimony, even when anonymized, has weight. Investigative journalists like Tom Bauer have noted patterns that emerge when multiple sources report similar observations. For instance, Repeated mentions of household tension, conflicts over schedules, and unexplained staff resignations form a narrative arc that cannot be dismissed outright. In the realm of public perception, repetition amplifies suspicion, and soon, social media narratives began to paint Meghan not just as a controversial figure, but as someone whose private choices might be scrutinized in the harshest terms. Let's pause for a moment and consider the human side of this. Imagine being in a position of responsibility for two young children in a highly scrutinized household. Every small choice is observed, every interaction analyzed. The pressure on staff members, and indeed on Meghan herself, would be enormous. Now imagine those pressures spilling over into media reports and public speculation. The tension between private challenges and public perception is intense, and it is easy for a single narrative, even if unverified, to gain momentum. What adds fuel to the fire are the discrepancies in reports. Some sources claim Meghan was meticulous, attentive, and deeply caring. Others suggest she was distant, sometimes preoccupied with professional engagements, media appearances, or advocacy work, leaving the children in the care of staff. The contradictions themselves create curiosity gaps. How can a parent be both fully attentive and frequently absent? Is this a matter of perspective, bias, or selective observation? Or is there a more complicated reality lurking beneath these claims? The role of the nanny also brings in another dimension: loyalty and fear. Staff members who witness alleged irregularities often hesitate to speak publicly. Fear of lawsuits, media backlash, or even personal safety can prevent the full story from emerging. As a result, the narrative we receive is fragmented, scattered across interviews, leaked documents, and third-party commentary. Investigators must piece together a story from incomplete evidence, balancing claims against known facts. In parallel, the media environment surrounding Meghan has been charged from day one. Headlines alternated between adulation and critique, creating a feedback loop. Public opinion influences coverage, and coverage, in turn, shapes opinion. In this environment, even minor claims by a former employee can become explosive. As discussions of the nanny rumors spread, they intersected with other controversies. Disputes with royal aides, high-profile interviews, and commentary from investigative journalists. Suddenly, these rumors were not isolated. They became part of a larger conversation about responsibility, transparency, and trust. One of the most intriguing aspects of these claims is the lack of official confirmation. There are no public records of investigations proving neglect or misconduct. This absence, paradoxically, heightens curiosity. Humans are wired to notice gaps in narratives. The missing piece becomes as compelling as the piece presented. Was the lack of confirmation a sign that nothing untoward occurred, or was it simply that the private world of a high-profile family is insulated from public oversight? This is the tension that drives speculation and maintains audience engagement. But what makes this chapter truly riveting is the timing of the allegations. They emerged shortly after Meghan and Harry relocated to California, a period of significant transition. Adjusting to life away from royal duties, managing media attention, and integrating into a new country are formidable tasks. Observers claim that during this transition, the household routines were particularly unstable. Allegations suggest that this instability extended to childcare, leading to the claims that would later circulate about neglect or inattentiveness. Yet, even here, perspective matters. To critics, the pattern of alleged absenteeism and disrupted routines paints a concerning picture. To supporters, it illustrates the challenges of modern parenting under extreme scrutiny. How much weight should we assign to reports from a former nanny? How much to the media's interpretation? And how much to the silence of authorities or the public statements of the family themselves? These questions fuel the narrative tension and keep audiences glued. And then comes the twist. Even within these claims, there are discrepancies in what is alleged versus what is confirmed. Some reports hint at contact with child welfare authorities, though without verification, it remains speculative. Others describe internal conflicts that were never made public. Every detail, every claim, adds a layer of complexity. The narrative becomes a puzzle, with pieces scattered across interviews, leaked accounts, and investigative texts. For the audience, this is irresistible. The drama is high. The stakes are deeply human. Children, family, trust, and public perception. We watch, we question, we imagine the dynamics unfolding behind closed doors. Who is telling the truth? Who is exaggerating? And what is the reality of life in a household that has become the focus of global scrutiny? But the most chilling question is this. What if the patterns these insiders describe are just the tip of the iceberg? What if the inconsistencies, disruptions, and alleged conflicts reveal something more profound about the pressures Meghan and Harry face, and how they navigate parenting in extreme public exposure? The answers are not straightforward, and they will continue to unfold as we dive deeper into the timeline, the sources, and the conflicting accounts. And just as the audience begins to form opinions, the story pivots. New claims emerge, new voices are heard, and the puzzle grows even more intricate. This is where the next chapter begins, with events that allegedly escalate the tension and bring the narrative into sharper focus. But the details of what came next are shocking, contradictory, and for many observers, nearly impossible to reconcile. The moment a whisper leaves the walls of a private home, it takes on a life of its own. For Meghan Markle, that whisper was about alleged concerns raised by her former nanny. But whispers, no matter how quiet at first, are irresistible to a public already primed to scrutinize her every move. In this chapter, we dive into how the alleged private disputes transformed into a full-blown media storm and why this matters for understanding the narrative surrounding Meghan and Harry. Imagine living under a microscope where every choice, a smile, a word, even the way you pour a cup of tea, is dissected by millions. That is the reality for Meghan Markle. Once the alleged concerns about childcare began circulating, the media began to amplify them. Headlines, tweets, opinion pieces, and investigative reports collided in a perfect storm. The narrative was no longer just a private family matter. It became a global conversation, with millions forming opinions based on fragments, speculation, and selective reporting. The media operates in a cycle: claim, amplification, reaction, and escalation. In Meghan's case, the cycle was turbocharged by two factors. First, the intense fascination with her as a modern American princess, a woman who simultaneously challenges tradition and embodies fairy tale glamour. Second, the timing. The couple had recently moved to California, stepping out of the traditional royal structure, making them more accessible to the press and social media commentary. Every move, every alleged misstep, was ripe for coverage. What makes this phenomenon so compelling is the human psychology behind it. Audiences crave stories that confirm biases, entertain with drama, and satisfy curiosity. A claim that a nanny might have had concerns about daily routines suddenly becomes a symbol for larger questions. Is Meghan neglectful? Is she a loving parent? Can anyone truly judge when the family's life is so intensely scrutinized? The contradictions themselves are magnetic. While some headlines decry alleged neglect, others laud her for protecting her children from media intrusion. This polarity keeps audiences engaged, debating, and returning for more. Investigative journalists, like Tom Bauer, pointed out that repeated claims from multiple sources, even if unverified, have an effect. They build a mosaic of speculation that is difficult to ignore. Bauer's writings suggest that patterns can be observed when staff turnover, alleged absenteeism, and public engagements are considered together. Whether or not the claims are accurate, the media's amplification makes them part of the public consciousness. And once these claims enter public discourse, they evolve. Tweets become articles, which become videos, which are then dissected by yet another layer of commentary. The emotional intensity of these stories is also critical. Reports describe alleged tension in the household, disagreements between staff and parents, and struggles with routines. For viewers, these are not abstract details. They evoke empathy, outrage, curiosity, or disbelief. We imagine ourselves in the shoes of the children, the parents, the staff. Would we tolerate inconsistency in daily care? Could we forgive interruptions in routine? These questions create an emotional investment that keeps audiences engaged for long periods. Social media accelerates everything. Once claims reached platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, they exploded. Accounts dedicated to royal news dissected every alleged statement, and hashtags trended around the issues of parenting, attention, and child well-being. For Meghan and Harry, this meant navigating not only media narratives, but also the court of public opinion, where perception often outweighs fact. The speed of social media ensures that once a narrative takes hold, it spreads faster than official statements or clarifications. Yet the story is never one-sided. Supporters of Meghan highlight her active engagement in philanthropic work, her media-savvy parenting strategies, and the protective measures she has taken to shield her children from public scrutiny. They argue that the very same media amplification that spreads alleged claims also distorts reality, turning small, perhaps routine incidents into scandalous fodder. This contradiction between perception and defense creates tension that is irresistible for an audience craving drama. It is also crucial to examine the role of investigative books and commentary. Authors like Bauer have historically focused on royal households, chronicling the pressures and scandals that lie beneath polished public images. Their work combines direct observation, interviews with insiders, and media analysis, constructing a narrative that both informs and provokes. When allegations from staff or other sources align with investigative findings, they gain more credibility, even if unconfirmed. The line between rumor and evidence blurs, further intensifying the audience's engagement. Now consider the implications. What began as an internal family concern has been transformed into a global story. Public opinion becomes both participant and judge, shaping the narrative in real time. Each headline, each viral post, contributes to a feedback loop that reinforces the drama, amplifies emotion, and keeps audiences coming back for more. This is the engine behind high-retention content: curiosity, suspense, and emotional spikes. The stakes are deeply human. These aren't abstract debates about policy or celebrity fashion. They involve children, parental responsibility, and the ethical dilemmas of caregiving in extraordinary circumstances. Audiences are drawn in because the issues resonate on a primal level: trust, care, protection, and the consequences of perceived failure. When a story intersects with universal concerns, its power is magnified exponentially. And then comes the twist that elevates the narrative further. As media scrutiny intensifies, new allegations surface. Contradictions emerge between different accounts, timelines become disputed, and the question of credibility takes center stage. Observers note discrepancies between what staff claim privately, what investigative authors report, and what the couple publicly acknowledges. These contradictions are not just incidental. They create suspense, encourage debate, and ensure that the story remains alive in the public imagination. Finally, the chapter ends with a chilling curiosity gap. If the media amplification is so powerful, and if the alleged claims are taken seriously by insiders, what is the truth behind the headlines? How much is real? How much is exaggerated? And how much is a reflection of broader societal biases toward public figures, especially women in positions of scrutiny? The next chapter will explore the timeline of alleged incidents, detailing specific moments, interactions, and events that have been highlighted by insiders and investigative commentators. Every story has a chronology, a sequence of events that transforms isolated incidents into patterns and patterns into narratives. In Meghan Markle's case, the alleged concerns raised by staff and insiders did not exist in a vacuum. They intersected with public appearances, high-profile interviews, and the couple's transition to life in California. Understanding the timeline is essential for grasping the complexity of the narrative and why the media and public became so captivated. The story begins shortly after Meghan and Harry's departure from royal duties. Moving from the structured, ceremonial life of the palace to the fluid and unstructured environment of Los Angeles was not a minor change. It was seismic. Sources indicate that during the first months, household routines were in flux. Caregivers allegedly observed inconsistencies in schedules, periods where the children were left in the care of staff for extended periods, and moments where Meghan or Harry's attention was focused elsewhere, often on public appearances, media commitments, or business ventures. While these situations might be typical for parents in demanding careers, when framed within the context of high-profile scrutiny, they took on a more intense significance. According to investigative accounts, the alleged concerns were not isolated to a single day or week. Instead, patterns began to emerge: shifts in routine, changes in who was responsible for day-to-day care, and sudden departures or resignations among household staff. Each event was small on its own, but together they painted a picture that fueled speculation. Analysts and commentators began mapping out these patterns, suggesting that they might indicate deeper issues related to attention, supervision, and household management. The timeline becomes even more complex when media appearances are considered. Meghan and Harry, navigating a new life in Los Angeles, engaged in numerous interviews, philanthropic events, and media projects. While these engagements elevated their public profile, insiders claim they also introduced stress and disruption into the household. Allegedly, the children's routines were adjusted or paused to accommodate filming schedules or travel, raising questions from staff about stability and consistency. Each deviation became a talking point, not only for internal observers, but also for journalists and authors tracking every detail. Another factor in the timeline is the reported interaction with investigative journalists and biographers. Sources indicate that staff members may have shared observations, sometimes anonymously, with authors chronicling the couple's post-royal life. These accounts, when aggregated, contributed to the narrative that patterns of absenteeism or disrupted routines were more than occasional lapses. They suggested, according to critics, a systemic issue. Supporters, however, argue that these claims were selective, exaggerated, or interpreted without sufficient context. What makes the timeline particularly intriguing is the emergence of contradictory accounts. Some staff described a household that was warm, attentive, and loving, noting that Meghan and Harry made extraordinary efforts to bond with their children despite their demanding public schedules. Others described tension, confusion, and periods where the children's care was delegated to others. This contradiction is at the heart of public fascination. How can two opposing depictions of the same household exist simultaneously? And which, if either, represents the truth? The alleged concerns also intersect with legal and procedural questions. While there is no public record of formal investigations confirming neglect or misconduct, speculation about potential involvement of child welfare authorities has circulated in media reports and commentary. These rumors, true or not, added a layer of drama to the timeline, prompting audiences to wonder whether private observations might have broader consequences. The absence of verification created a tension-filled gap, an unanswered question that keeps viewers and readers engaged. Emotionally, the timeline also captures spikes that resonate with audiences. The highs, moments of public celebration, family outings, and media appearances, contrast sharply with reported lows, staff resignations, alleged disputes over routines, and the constant pressure of public scrutiny. This emotional oscillation, alternating between admiration and suspicion, mirrors the roller coaster that viewers experience. It's not just a story about events. It's a story about feelings, reactions, and human response to perceived risk and responsibility. Direct questions emerge as the timeline unfolds. Were the alleged concerns truly indicative of neglect, or were they reflections of ordinary parenting challenges magnified by extraordinary circumstances? Did the media amplify these claims responsibly, or did sensationalism take precedence over accuracy? How do personal biases, public perception, and incomplete information shape the narrative we consume? These questions are not rhetorical. They drive the investigation forward, keeping audiences actively engaged and invested in uncovering the truth. Adding complexity to the timeline are the contradictory public statements and social media posts by Meghan and Harry. Each public appearance, interview, or Instagram post offers a snapshot of family life, curated, polished, and controlled. Analysts and critics compare these snapshots with alleged insider accounts, noting discrepancies or patterns that appear inconsistent. For example, while a social media post might show a joyful family moment, investigative sources claim that behind the scenes, routines were disrupted and tensions simmered. The tension between public persona and private reality is a core element of the unfolding narrative. Perhaps the most gripping aspect of the timeline is the escalation of claims. Initial whispers and staff observations, when combined with media amplification and investigative commentary, gradually evolve into more substantial allegations. Patterns, contradictions, and unanswered questions coalesce, creating a storyline that feels both immediate and compelling. Audience curiosity is piqued not just by the alleged incidents themselves, but by the narrative architecture, the way events connect, escalate, and collide with public perception. And then comes the cliffhanger. As the timeline reaches critical moments, interviews, statements from investigative authors, and public appearances, new allegations emerge. These are not minor footnotes. They suggest dynamics and interactions that intensify the debate. Observers are left with pressing questions. What truly happened behind closed doors? Were the patterns indicative of systemic issues, isolated lapses, or simply the normal chaos of parenting under extraordinary circumstances? And most importantly, how will these unfolding events influence both public opinion and the family's private life moving forward? The next chapter will dive deeper into these allegations, exploring specific claims, interactions, and events that have been highlighted in investigative reports. We will examine how insiders describe day-to-day routines, moments of conflict, and instances that allegedly reveal larger patterns of behavior. Each detail will add depth, tension, and drama, leading to revelations that will challenge assumptions, provoke debate, and set the stage for even more explosive developments. When outsiders look at Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, they see carefully curated images, family portraits, philanthropic work, public appearances, and social media snapshots of children laughing under sunny Californian skies. But the reality inside a household, particularly one under intense scrutiny, is rarely as polished. In this chapter, we explore what insiders, particularly household staff, have claimed to observe, and how those observations shaped early narratives of tension and alleged mismanagement. From the very start of Meghan and Harry's transition to California, sources describe a household in flux. Staff members, some of whom had previously worked for other high-profile families, reportedly noticed irregularities in routines. Alleged inconsistencies in meals, sleep schedules, and supervised playtime raised concerns, prompting whispered conversations among the household staff. To an outsider, these observations might seem minor. Yet, when the observers are responsible for day-to-day childcare, small deviations can accumulate into patterns that appear significant. The alleged concerns were not only about routines. Staff reportedly observed moments where Meghan or Harry's attention was focused on other matters. Media engagements, philanthropic planning, or personal commitments, leaving the children in the care of staff for extended periods. These observations, while unverified in public records, became a cornerstone of speculation. Critics argued that prolonged periods of delegation could indicate neglect or inattentiveness, while supporters countered that reliance on caregivers is standard for working parents, particularly those balancing demanding public lives. One of the most frequently discussed elements of the household reports was the alleged tension between staff members and Meghan. Some sources described disagreements over routines, disciplinary approaches, and general management of the children. These conflicts reportedly created a charged environment, with staff feeling pressure and uncertainty about their roles. While some accounts emphasized professionalism and positive interactions, others suggested that disagreements were emotionally intense, highlighting the challenges of balancing private household needs with public expectations. A particularly controversial point raised in some investigative accounts was the staff's alleged frustration with unpredictability. The family's dynamic, critics claimed, included last-minute changes to schedules, unexpected trips, and sudden media appearances. For caregivers, this unpredictability could create stress, confusion, and concern about the children's well-being. Observers speculated that these challenges might have contributed to patterns of absenteeism or lapses in supervision, claims that, while unverified, fueled intense public debate. The staff accounts also reportedly touched on emotional moments. Children, according to some sources, experienced confusion or frustration during routine disruptions. Observers claim that Meghan and Harry responded inconsistently, sometimes with warmth, other times with distance. These variations, when viewed through the lens of childcare standards, became focal points for criticism. How much attention is enough? How should parents balance public commitments with private responsibilities? These questions resonate deeply with audiences and intensify curiosity about the household dynamics. It is important to emphasize that staff observations are inherently subjective. Human memory, personal biases, and professional frustrations can color perceptions. Some insiders may exaggerate minor issues for attention or leverage. Others may interpret normal parenting challenges as serious problems due to heightened sensitivity. Yet the very existence of multiple, overlapping accounts creates a pattern that is difficult to ignore. Whether accurate, exaggerated, or misunderstood, these narratives form a foundation for the ongoing debate. Beyond routines and emotional moments, reports also focus on broader household management. Some staff allegedly noticed inconsistencies in delegation, communication, and decision-making. While Meghan and Harry's public life demanded coordination, investigative accounts suggest that these demands sometimes clashed with the structure needed to maintain stable domestic routines. Observers claim that these clashes contributed to staff dissatisfaction, eventual resignations, and, in some cases, allegations of neglect, all of which became fuel for media coverage and public speculation. Another layer of intrigue arises when contrasting insider claims with public appearances. On social media, Meghan and Harry frequently showcased family moments that seemed joyful and harmonious. Yet insiders described a household that was often tense, chaotic, or fraught with conflict. This stark contrast created a curiosity gap that audiences found irresistible. How could public images of serenity coexist with behind-the-scenes turbulence? The gap between appearance and alleged reality became a central element of the narrative, raising questions about authenticity, media control, and public perception. Critics seized on these contrasts to suggest a pattern, that Meghan and Harry's carefully curated public image masked private difficulties. Investigative authors noted that repeated discrepancies, staff accounts versus social media snapshots, created a narrative tension that was difficult to resolve. Supporters, however, emphasized the importance of separating professional media management from private parenting, arguing that public appearances do not necessarily reflect household behavior. This tension between perception and reality drives the dramatic suspense of the story, keeping audiences engaged chapter after chapter. Emotional stakes are heightened by the human element. Children's experiences, staff stress, and parental responses resonate with viewers on a primal level. Questions about attention, supervision, and emotional security are universally compelling. Audiences naturally project themselves into the scenario. Would we notice if something was amiss? How would we react? Could we navigate a high-pressure household under the constant scrutiny of the public and media? These questions create psychological engagement, ensuring that viewers remain invested in the unfolding narrative. As the chapter unfolds, patterns emerge. Alleged concerns raised by staff, media amplification, and investigative commentary intersect in ways that suggest continuity rather than isolated incidents. While no formal confirmation exists, the repetition of observations creates a narrative arc: routine disruptions, attention gaps, emotional turbulence, and staff frustration. Each element builds tension, propelling the audience toward deeper curiosity about what comes next and what ultimate conclusions might be drawn. The chapter concludes with a mini cliffhanger. The household observations, while powerful on their own, are only part of the story. Subsequent chapters will explore interactions with the broader media, legal speculation, and public commentary. Elements that escalate the narrative, introduce new contradictions, and push the boundaries of perception and speculation. What comes next will not just challenge assumptions about daily routines, but raise questions about responsibility, accountability, and the delicate balance between private family life and public scrutiny. The revelations that follow could redefine how the world perceives Meghan and Harry's approach to parenting, and nothing will ever be quite the same again. The moment allegations about Meghan Markle's parenting began circulating, a new dimension entered the conversation: Child Protective Services. Rumors spread that concerns raised by former staff might have involved calls to authorities. But what is fact, what is speculation, and what is misinterpretation? In this chapter, we explore how these claims emerged, why they captured public imagination, and the ways in which investigative reporting, media amplification, and rumor intersect to create controversy. It begins with the psychology of allegations. When whispers emerge about child welfare, audiences respond differently than they would to less emotionally charged claims. The stakes feel higher. Questions of responsibility, care, and morality come to the forefront. Even an unverified rumor about a CPS report is enough to trigger intense discussion, speculation, and media attention. Human instinct compels us to focus on the protection of children, making this aspect of the story inherently dramatic and emotionally gripping. Sources suggest that early staff concerns about routines, supervision, and household stability were interpreted by some observers as potentially serious enough to contact child welfare authorities. It is unclear whether any formal investigation occurred. Official records have not confirmed any CPS involvement, and representatives for Meghan and Harry have not publicly acknowledged such claims. Yet the mere suggestion of CPS involvement spread rapidly across social media, fueling speculation and heightening audience curiosity. Why does this matter for narrative tension? Because it raises a critical question. In the world of public figures, what happens when private concerns are misinterpreted, exaggerated, or taken out of context? Allegations involving child welfare carry enormous weight. They provoke strong emotional reactions, invite judgment, and can fundamentally shape public perception, even when evidence is lacking or ambiguous. For audiences, this tension is magnetic. The fear of harm, the uncertainty of truth, and the potential consequences all combine to create a gripping storyline. Investigative commentators like Tom Bauer have highlighted patterns that contribute to speculation about CPS claims. Staff turnover, disrupted routines, and reported tensions in the household are all pieces of the puzzle. Even in the absence of formal records, these patterns, when examined collectively, create the perception of concern. Critics argue that perception often becomes reality in the court of public opinion. Once rumors reach critical mass, they take on a life of their own, reinforced by repetition and media amplification. Yet the story is never straightforward. Defenders of Meghan emphasize that speculation about CPS involvement is entirely unverified. There is no public evidence of any formal investigation or intervention. In fact, many argue that the narrative has been distorted by a combination of selective reporting, misinterpretation of staff anecdotes, and the amplification of uncorroborated claims. The result is a tension between alleged facts and publicly confirmed information, a gap that drives curiosity and audience retention. How do audiences interpret such claims? Psychologically, humans are drawn to ambiguity. We are compelled to fill in gaps, resolve contradictions, and imagine scenarios that reconcile conflicting narratives. In this case, the lack of official confirmation creates a vacuum that speculation fills. Social media users, commentators, and bloggers offer interpretations, constructing their own narratives based on fragments, anonymous reports, and investigative claims. This dynamic ensures sustained engagement, as viewers and readers attempt to piece together the truth from incomplete evidence. Another layer of complexity emerges when we consider media reporting. Headlines hinting at CPS involvement, even when carefully worded with disclaimers such as alleged or rumored, have the power to shape perception. Audiences often skim headlines rather than reading full articles, absorbing the suggestion rather than the nuance. This phenomenon amplifies curiosity, generates controversy, and drives engagement metrics, exactly what keeps viewers glued to content for extended periods. The emotional stakes are also critical. Stories involving alleged child welfare concerns provoke moral judgment. Audiences naturally ask, are the children safe? Is the parent responsible? Could this happen in my own family? These questions create a visceral engagement that is difficult to replicate with neutral topics. By exploring alleged CPS claims, the narrative taps into universal human concerns, ensuring that viewers remain emotionally invested. Direct questions keep the audience engaged. How much weight should be given to anonymous reports? What role does media amplification play in shaping perception? Are public figures held to higher standards of scrutiny than ordinary parents? And perhaps most importantly, how do we discern fact from rumor when the stakes involve children, privacy, and potential allegations of misconduct? These questions drive curiosity forward, creating a narrative momentum that naturally leads into the next chapter. The alleged CPS claims also intersect with broader discussions about modern parenting in public life. Meghan and Harry, navigating fame, philanthropy, and media attention, face extraordinary pressures. Balancing public commitments with private family life is challenging for anyone, let alone global figures under constant scrutiny. Critics interpret alleged lapses as negligence, while supporters argue they reflect the normal complexity of high-profile parenting. This tension between perception and interpretation fuels the ongoing fascination with the story. As the chapter progresses, a pattern emerges. Alleged concerns about routines, staff observations, and potential CPS involvement are not isolated incidents, but part of an evolving narrative. They intersect with public appearances, media coverage, and investigative reporting to create a compelling, emotionally charged story. Audience engagement is heightened because the narrative combines mystery, human stakes, and the tension between private reality and public perception. And just as the audience begins to form judgments, the chapter ends with a cliffhanger. The alleged CPS concerns, while unverified, set the stage for new developments. Staff interviews, media speculation, and investigative claims suggest that the story is far from over. Questions remain about the children's experiences, the household dynamics, and the family's response to scrutiny. What comes next will escalate the tension even further, revealing new conflicts, contradictions, and emotional stakes that will challenge everything the audience thought they knew. The moment a private allegation reaches public attention, the story transforms. For Meghan Markle, claims about staff concerns, household routines, and alleged CPS involvement became a global spectacle. In this chapter, we examine the reactions. The fans who defended her, the critics who questioned her, and the larger royal context that shaped public perception. Understanding these reactions is crucial for grasping how the narrative evolved and why audience engagement surged. Public reaction is never uniform. Meghan has long been a polarizing figure, adored for her advocacy, charisma, and perceived independence, yet criticized for her approach to the royal institution, her media strategy, and, increasingly, her parenting. Once the alleged staff concerns circulated, these pre-existing biases intensified. Admirers were quick to dismiss rumors as sensationalist or motivated by prejudice. Critics seized the opportunity to highlight perceived inconsistencies, amplifying allegations as evidence of neglect or inattention. The polarization itself created a dramatic tension that media outlets and social platforms eagerly exploited. Social media, in particular, served as a magnifying glass. Tweets, posts, and comment threads dissected every alleged incident, creating an environment in which speculation spread faster than confirmation. Hashtags, viral videos, and discussion forums became echo chambers, reinforcing pre-existing beliefs while also attracting new observers. For audiences, this created a sense of urgency and immediacy. The story was alive, constantly evolving, and impossible to ignore. Fans who supported Meghan emphasized context and nuance. They argued that public scrutiny is intense and relentless, particularly for women in power. They pointed out that parenting is complex under normal circumstances, let alone under the microscope of global attention. Any perceived lapses, they claimed, could be exaggerated or misinterpreted. Social media campaigns, petitions, and commentary often highlighted her charitable work, parenting successes, and media-savvy strategies as evidence that allegations should not be taken at face value. Critics, however, focused on patterns they perceived across media reports, staff accounts, and investigative commentary. They argued that repeated mentions of disrupted routines, staff concerns, and alleged absenteeism created a troubling picture. For them, the story was about accountability. High-profile parents are not immune from critique, especially when questions about children's well-being are involved. This perspective fueled online debates, video essays, and long-form articles that dissected every known detail. The royal lens added another dimension. Unlike ordinary public figures, Meghan and Harry operate within a unique framework where personal choices intersect with centuries of tradition, protocol, and media scrutiny. Every parenting decision is interpreted not just as a private choice, but as a reflection on the institution itself. Investigative authors have repeatedly highlighted how royal expectations, public attention, and personal agency collide, creating scenarios that outsiders struggle to contextualize. This lens intensifies reactions. What might seem minor in an ordinary household becomes magnified in a royal-adjacent context. Emotional spikes in public discourse are particularly revealing. Outrage, sympathy, curiosity, and moral judgment all intertwine. Audiences respond not just to facts, but to the narrative arcs implied by conflicting accounts. Staff observations suggest tension, while social media snapshots suggest harmony. Public appearances indicate attentiveness, yet investigative commentary highlights alleged absenteeism. Each contradiction prompts emotional engagement, driving viewers to stay invested, debate, and return for updates. Another layer to public reaction is the intersection of celebrity culture and moral judgment. Meghan's fame means that private life is consumed as entertainment, often blurring ethical boundaries. Allegations about parenting invite audience projection. People imagine themselves in similar situations, evaluating decisions through personal experience and cultural norms. This relatability heightens emotional stakes, making the narrative more compelling and the cliffhangers more gripping. The media's role in shaping these reactions cannot be overstated. Investigative reports, sensational headlines, and social commentary intersect to create a complex ecosystem of information and opinion. Even when claims are unverified, repetition across platforms increases perceived credibility. Audiences, confronted with multiple sources, are drawn to reconcile discrepancies, generating sustained engagement. In effect, the media amplifies the story, intensifies emotional responses, and perpetuates curiosity gaps, all of which keep viewers glued for extended periods. Direct questions heighten engagement further. How do public perceptions influence private realities? Are judgments formed from social media glimpses accurate reflections of family life? What is the responsibility of journalists, authors, and commentators in reporting allegations involving children? And crucially, how do Meghan and Harry navigate a world in which perception often overrides nuance? These questions ensure active audience participation, prompting reflection and debate. Patterns emerge from these reactions. Supporters emphasize context, privacy, and advocacy work. Critics focus on patterns of alleged lapses, staff concerns, and media contradictions. The narrative tension lies in the inability to reconcile these perspectives fully, creating a curiosity gap that keeps viewers engaged. Every public reaction, tweet, or article feeds back into the story, shaping perceptions and influencing subsequent reporting. And just as the audience begins to form opinions, the cliffhanger emerges. As public reactions intensified, new narratives surfaced. Some insiders hinted at developments that were not yet publicly reported, moments that could validate or contradict prior claims. Observers were left questioning. What is true, what is exaggerated, and what remains hidden behind closed doors? The answers are not yet clear, setting the stage for revelations that will escalate tension, introduce new conflicts, and challenge assumptions in ways the audience could not anticipate. In the world of high-profile families, the line between public image and private reality is often blurred. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, this divide has been particularly pronounced. Public appearances, social media snapshots, and interviews present one image, while alleged insider accounts and staff observations suggest another. In this chapter, we examine these contradictions, exploring how they shape public perception, fuel speculation, and intensify curiosity. From the outside, Meghan and Harry appear as a harmonious, modern family. Carefully staged photographs show smiling children, playful moments, and polished household scenes. Social media amplifies this image, presenting an idyllic vision of family life under sunny Californian skies. Yet, according to some investigative accounts, this public image may only tell part of the story. Staff and insiders have allegedly observed moments of tension, disrupted routines, and challenges that contrast sharply with the curated snapshots presented to the world. Why do these contradictions matter? Humans are wired to notice discrepancies. When what we see publicly conflicts with what we are told privately, curiosity is triggered. We instinctively want to reconcile the two versions of reality. Are the allegations of disrupted routines and staff tension true? Or are they exaggerations, misinterpretations, or selective glimpses of ordinary household challenges? This tension between visible image and alleged reality creates a compelling narrative that keeps audiences engaged chapter after chapter. The contradictions extend beyond routines. Investigative authors highlight moments when the couple's public persona of attentiveness and warmth seems at odds with staff accounts of delegation or absence. Critics interpret these differences as evidence of inconsistency or even negligence, while supporters argue they are the natural result of a high-profile life under intense scrutiny. The complexity lies in the interpretation. The same set of facts can be read in dramatically different ways depending on perspective and pre-existing bias. Social media plays a critical role in amplifying these contradictions. Every photograph, post, and interview is dissected for hidden meaning. Audiences compare images of playful family outings with anonymous accounts of tension and uncertainty inside the household. This creates a curiosity gap, the sensation that there is more to the story than meets the eye. Viewers are compelled to stay engaged, analyze evidence, and form their own conclusions, sustaining attention across long-form content. Another layer involves the timing of public appearances. Meghan and Harry's philanthropic engagements, interviews, and media projects often coincide with alleged periods of household disruption. Critics point to these overlaps as evidence of divided attention or inconsistent parenting. Supporters counter that these public commitments are essential for career, advocacy, and family security, arguing that the narrative of contradiction is amplified for dramatic effect. Regardless of interpretation, the tension between public image and alleged private behavior fuels ongoing debate. Direct questions heighten engagement. How do public personas influence our judgment of private behavior? Can a parent be fully attentive while also managing public commitments? What is the responsibility of media, authors, and insiders in framing these narratives? And importantly, how do we reconcile conflicting accounts when official verification is absent? These questions keep the audience actively involved, prompting reflection and debate while deepening curiosity about subsequent revelations. Emotional stakes are amplified by the human element. Children's experiences, parental stress, and household tension resonate on a universal level. Audiences project themselves into scenarios, imagining how they would respond to similar challenges. Moments of alleged inconsistency or disruption evoke concern, empathy, or even moral judgment, creating an emotional investment that drives retention across chapters. Patterns emerge when contradictions are examined collectively. Alleged staff observations, media coverage, and social media snapshots form a mosaic that is complex, often conflicting, but undeniably compelling. Each element contributes to an overarching narrative of tension and curiosity. Observers are drawn in not just by isolated incidents, but by the perceived pattern that emerges over time, a story that appears both sensational and emotionally charged. The investigative lens further complicates the picture. Authors like Tom Bauer emphasize the importance of triangulating sources, comparing accounts, and identifying recurring themes. In Meghan and Harry's case, repeated mentions of household disruption, staff tension, and routine inconsistencies create a narrative thread, even if individual claims are unverified. This analytical approach heightens audience engagement by encouraging critical thinking, speculation, and debate. As the chapter progresses, another critical factor comes into play: timing and escalation. Contradictions are most powerful when they occur alongside high-profile events. Interviews, social media posts, or public appearances. The contrast between polished public images and alleged private realities intensifies drama, creating suspense that drives viewers to the next chapter. Audiences are left asking, what will happen next? Which version of reality is accurate? And how will these discrepancies affect the ongoing narrative surrounding the family? Finally, the cliffhanger emerges. These contradictions, while compelling on their own, are only part of the story. Subsequent chapters will explore escalating allegations, media interpretation, and insider revelations that push the narrative further into controversy. What comes next will challenge assumptions, introduce new emotional stakes, and raise questions that no audience member could answer easily. The next chapter will delve into the alleged conflicts between Meghan, Harry, and staff. A story of tension, negotiation, and conflicting priorities that sets the stage for even more explosive revelations. The audience is left anticipating the unfolding drama, eager to see how private reality and public image collide in ways that could redefine the entire narrative. Every household has disagreements, but in high-profile families like Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's, even minor conflicts become magnified under public scrutiny. In this chapter, we explore alleged tensions between staff members and the couple, examining how disputes over routines, responsibilities, and childcare strategies fueled speculation and intensified media narratives. The story begins with reported friction over daily routines. Staff members, some with extensive experience in high-profile households, allegedly noticed inconsistencies in schedules, mealtimes, and supervision. Some accounts suggest that these inconsistencies led to frustration among caregivers, creating an environment of tension and unease. For outsiders, these details might seem mundane, but for those responsible for the children's daily care, they were significant. According to investigative sources, conflicts were not limited to logistical issues. Emotional disagreements reportedly arose over approaches to discipline, supervision, and engagement with the children. Staff allegedly felt caught between directives from Meghan and Harry and the practical realities of managing two young children under intense public scrutiny. Critics suggest that these disagreements reflected a deeper disconnect between the couple's public persona and the private management of the household. The consequences of these tensions, according to some reports, were tangible. Staff resignations, abrupt departures, and turnover created instability in the household. Investigative authors have suggested that repeated staff changes contributed to a cycle of disruption, reinforcing narratives of inconsistency and alleged neglect. Supporters argue that high-profile households naturally experience staff turnover, and that such patterns do not necessarily indicate broader problems.